Good evening, everybody. It's time again for the Bluff Creek Project podcast. I'm Kip Morrill. I am one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, with my good friend and partner in crime, Mr. Tate Hieronymus.
Good.
Tate, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Kip. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's one of the hottest days here. I think in the spring, we're going to have some record high temperatures this week here in Sacramento area. Looking like 105 to 106,
that's
I think.
Hot.
Yeah, we call that Africa hot. So it's going to be pretty warm. But are you still there in beautiful Iowa, known for its many creeks, rivers, valleys, peaks?
Don't forget corn.
And corn, yes.
I still am. I will be gone in August, though.
Right, but I understand you're coming out to California for a pretty long spell in July. So up to Bluff Creek and maybe some of the areas up there in what's the valley we're talking about, Tate? That you're
Shasta?
talking about going to? No. Above there, above Bluff Creek.
The special place. Yeah.
Yes. So. Anyways, I am really excited. I'm always excited about our guests because we're always talking to some really interesting people. And our friend coming to us from back east at an undisclosed location, and actually a friend of ours that we just happened to meet kind of accidentally, which was really pretty cool. So let's go ahead and welcome our friend Ron Reed to the show. Ron,
hey, I'm doing good, guys.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I remember it was October of 2018, and we were there at Louse Camp, and a vehicle rolled in, and out pops this guy and his dog, and I think that you'd been told that we were camping up there from somebody. I think maybe Steven or somebody told you that we were all camping up there at Louse Camp.
Yeah, that would have been Steven at Bigfoot Books.
That's right. And it was an amazing connection because there you were with your partner in crime, Bandit, and hiking the little known and really kind of still kind of hard to find, but the Bigfoot trail. So yeah, it was really, really kind of neat. And you were actually trying to work on a documentary about the Klamath area, which was really interesting. And so getting things started, tell us a little about yourself and how you got into this whole kind of, and I always say it, this crazy world of Bigfoot.
Okay. Well, I got to go back in time a little bit. Growing up, I was always exploring. I mean, that undisclosed location, we could at least say that I'm in Tennessee. Can't get more specific than that, but I'm in the Tennessee in the southeast here. And I grew up with about 8.5 acres of family property, woodland and some fields and a pond where we could catch fish. And so I was always out there looking for signs of animals and always into wildlife. And that kind of transitioned into wildlife conservation. So my heroes were like the crocodile hunter and some of the other guys that would show up on Animal Planet. And somewhere down the line, I think it was because I was watching those types of shows early in the morning, I got interested in cryptozoology just in general as like a teenage kid. I was a preteen, probably 11 or 12 years old. And the show on Animal Planet called Animal X was kind of what got me involved in it. And so it was the first summer I'd wake up early to watch this show. And it was the first summer that my sister was off babysitting and I had the shared computer all to myself. And so I would Google Bigfoot, chupacabra, lake monsters, and become more familiar with those things. And before I knew it, I was getting books on the subject and watching all those television specials that I could find. And I kind of graduated high school, and then I was like, well, now what? Where do we go from here? And that's when I started doing the field investigations.
Interesting. And it was really a great opportunity. We spent some time together there at Louse Camp and sitting around the campfire, and and I just thought it was really amazing, for somebody to be young and brave, I guess could be the term, that would basically pack up, want to go out to Bigfoot country and backpack by yourself for the first time alone. And, I just thought that was such an interesting story. Can you kind of back us up to how that all started and just lead us right into that whole story?
Well, I was very strong-willed as a kid, and everyone, as seniors in high school, they had their lives all planned out. Well, I'm going to inherit this business from my dad, or I'm going to go to college with this scholarship and become a nurse or something like that. And I guess I was inspired by a lot of my outdoorsy background, and I wanted to pretty much be Jeremiah Johnson. I wanted to be a mountain man. and I hadn't been out enough in all of the states to kind of realize that, it's harder to do that. A lot of that land's government land and stuff like that. But I wanted to go and look for Bigfoot. And I guess I thought the way that a lot of first time Bigfoot investigators think, like, I've got an angle. I think I've cracked the riddle. I'm going to go out there and find him because I'm going to prove that I'm smarter than him. I'll find a track and then it's all downhill from there. And I honestly can't tell you where I found the courage to just up and go out there by myself. I had camped on our 8-acre property, but the house was less than a 5-minute walk away from where I would camp. And I had practiced some outdoor survival skills from the same teenage years. So I guess I was just confident. And I more or less went out there and had a conversation with my dad one day at 17 years old. I was like, I'm going to go out there and look for Bigfoot in California. And he's like, no, you're not. And then I was like, well, yeah, I am, or I'm going to turn 18 and then go out there anyway. And so it's kind of like, okay, I guess you are. My parents were pretty supportive with that first trip. And before I knew it, I was 17 years old, flying out to San Francisco. And then I took a bus to Arcata up there in Humboldt County, and then a local transit to Willow Creek, which is the gateway to Bigfoot country. And then I started hiking around and hitchhiking a little bit here and there. And I remember it was a hot day. It was mid-August. It was just hot and dry. And I was eating blackberries on the side of the highway there to kind of refuel and conserve some of my water. And that's when a couple of residents of the Hoopa Valley Indian Reservation showed up, and they kind of took me in and showed me around the res and some of the forest in the area. And it was exciting. It was cool to be in Hoopa because I had just read the Hoopa Project by David Paulides. And yeah, that was a wild adventure. I had everything you could imagine, from almost stepping on rattlesnakes, not once, but twice, to running into irrigation pipes, which, people will tell you, like, if there aren't houses around, that could be for, growing. So
Yep.
it was in a lot of weird, I just kind of got thrusted into a lot of scary situations. But I survived, and I thought about it. I was like, do I want to do that again? It probably took me a whole year to think about whether I wanted to do it again. And then I was like, you know what? Yeah, I could do that again.
Well, I particularly, you told me the story about how you had way too much gear, and how you camped out one night, literally on the trail, scared to death, out of your mind. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Okay, so when I first got into it, I learned backpacking from the Boy Scouts. So I had MREs as meals, and I was trying to hike in all my water. And what else did I have? Oh, the big thing was, okay, I had a 70-liter backpack or 60-liter backpack, and that weighed 70 pounds. And then I had a 25-pound portable generator.
Oh my god!
Charged my cameras and stuff, but that wouldn't fit in the big backpack, so I had the school backpack. And so I had one backpack on my front and the big backpack on my back, and I was kind of like waddling down the trail like a sumo guy.
Wow.
And then it's like if I got too exhausted doing that, I would put one pack down and then run up a tenth of a mile and then come back and get the other one. And then I was getting paranoid. Well, what if a bear finds my food like in that 20-minute period, while I'm away? But yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of trial and error, and I'd been on 2 or 3 backpacking trips up to that point, so that was it was still new to me, and I was planning on going somewhere and then camping out a couple of nights in the middle. That's why I wanted to bring everything in, because it wasn't, like you do with long distance hikes where you refuel along the way as you come into towns. It was like I got to hike it all in and camp out and then come out. But yeah, I was actually about the rattlesnakes and the pipes that I saw. That was on the Bluff Creek Historic Trail. So somebody dropped me off in what I thought was another location, and they said, "Oh yeah, I know where that trail is," and they put me off in the wrong area. And after we got to that location and I saw what I saw, I was like, oh, I need to get out of here. and then I had a bunch of free days, and so we went back to the forest, the ranger station, and the guy was like, well, why don't you do some hiking in the Trinity Alps? And I said, well, that sounds good. Yeah, let's go up there. And where we were, it was just a couple of miles north of like Hoopa, where there were some sightings going on. So it sounded good. And I got out there and I was hiking. And yeah, at one point the sun started to get low, and I was trying to get to one specific location. And the trail conditions out there were spotty. I'm used to well-defined trails, I guess, here in the East. There's a lot more going on climate-wise, with fires and things that kind of sweep through the area. A lot of the conditions of those trails out there on the West, they're less than favorable, I'll say that. But I got out there, and I was walking for maybe 15 minutes before I realized I was on an animal trail and not the designated trail. And the sun was pretty much gone, and the moon started to come out, but it was getting dark, and I just remember getting like really frustrated with it, because it was my first legendary Bigfoot expedition, and here I am lost on a deer trail with way too much stuff that at that point I was about 60% ready to just roll it down the mountain. And, maybe I would have eaten a couple of the MREs first, and then everything else would have just been in the valley. But I reached this point of mental and physical exhaustion, but I got up and backtracked to where I knew I was on the official trail again. But like you said earlier, I was just done at that point, and I set up my tent right on the trail, because I was kind of on this steep ridge, and it would have been another hour or so of hiking before I would have been at a flat campable area. And I don't think I had the personal stamina to do it at that point anyway. I mean, collectively I had about 85 pounds worth of gear at that point.
Wow.
Between the generator, the camera gear, the MREs, the water, and the
barbecue. the
Yeah.
The love. What's the
skateboard.
couch?
The love
Yeah,
seat.
love seat.
No, I had a futon actually.
But there you were, and exhausted mentally, physically. You literally set up a tent right on the trail.
Yeah. And I sat there. I didn't even get the tent all the way up. I remember kind of putting maybe the poles in. Not even that. No, I just rolled the tent out, and then I had a tripod, like a 60-inch tripod, and extended it, and then that kind of sort of made a frame. And I just kind of like laid down in the fetal position around this tripod with a tent fabric over me, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So that's when I started to hear noises, and to this day I don't know if I imagined them or if something was really strolling down the trail. And I had a sheath knife, and I took it off my belt loop and was banging the metal knife on the tripod leg and screaming, whatever's out there. I was like, yeah, get out of there, so
I'm just picturing that.
Yeah.
Well,
it's funny because at some point I get better at camping, but we're not there.
And we're all laughing about it now, and we're all entertained by it now. But certainly at that point in your life, you weren't laughing.
Mm-hmm. No, and I felt like there was something coming, and I wasn't thinking Bigfoot. Honestly, I wasn't thinking Bigfoot was coming down the trail to get me. But I was thinking maybe a bear, maybe a mountain lion, because both of those were reported in that area, and I knew that much. And so not having another person there or even a dog like I do now to kind of alert me of something approaching, I was extremely paranoid. And so what I did then inside of my tent, I think at that point I made an attempt to actually set up the tent a little better. But the dimensions of the tent were too big for that trail. And I remember there was probably about 1.5 feet, almost 2 feet of my tent kind of rolled over going down the slope.
Oh no.
So I was trying to lean on the opposite side because I didn't want to start rolling in the middle of the night. But then I started a fire on the end where I was going to be sleeping. And what I did is I made a little fire for a little bit. And this was like the worst fire. Like this was dry season. Fires were banned.
Oh, no.
Yeah, well, I know. And that's the thing was I made this really tiny fire. And then I almost after maybe just 30 minutes, I put it out and then covered all the coals with dirt. But my whole idea was if something was going to sneak up behind me on that end, it would step on hot coals. So I was trying to 17-year-old me was thinking well, okay, what did we learn from that 20 minutes you watched of Rambo with your grandfather?
You're setting some booby traps there.
Yeah, I was trying to do something like that. And, looking back on it, I think it would have been a lot worse if I just, caught on fire than if I got attacked by something. But yeah, so that was in a nutshell. I woke up the next day and just kind of broke down. And that was kind of one of those moments that you hear more often when you start talking to people in the wilderness. That's your moment where everything kind of unravels and you have to regather yourself. But I remember it was so hard to get up and motivate to hike out that day because I knew it was going to be a repeat of the day before.
Oh no.
And yeah, so I actually called up my connection out there in California. I was like, I got to get out of here. This is not what I expected. I came, I saw, I didn't need to conquer it. I just let's move on to the next thing. And well, he was actually coaching football, so he wasn't going to be available until almost midnight was when he would be there to
Oh
get me.
man.
But I hiked out so fast. I got out probably about 6. So it took me roughly about half the time hiking out as it did hiking in, and my pack only weighed maybe 4 pounds less. So nature can motivate you.
I was gonna say you were pretty motivated at that point to get out.
Yeah. But I mean, I remember that hike was also really cool because I was seeing bears in the wild for the first time, like during the day, and they didn't freak me out, because they were far away for the most part. But when I got out of there, I actually had something kind of squatchy happen when I was waiting on him to come back, because I had to wait at the trailhead for so long. I thought I'd try some wood knocks, and I mean, I tried everything else. I dumped my pack at one point and explored another trail and then saw a bear. That was when I saw the bear from a close distance. It was a little cinnamon colored, like a young adult black bear. And I probably saw that thing from about 20 feet away, because through a thimbleberry thicket. And the reason I could tell you is a thimbleberry is because out of those 85 pounds that I was carrying a 2-pound book on wild edible plants. Nice. So I found some berries, and I was munching on these berries, and I heard something else munching on berries behind me, and I turned around like, oh.
And you had your book. You could tell them all, I just want you to.
Yeah, I was like, hey, by the way, it's safe. You can eat these.
That's right.
Oh, you already knew that? Oh, okay.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, after kind of playing around the different trails there and backtracking, I just kind of sat on the stump. I was like, well, I can't do anything else but wait, And that's when I started to do the wood knocks. And it was quiet for a few minutes, but then I started to hear something. I don't know which direction I was facing directionally, but I guess to my right was when I heard something from like a distant range. It sounded like a knock. And then I heard something kind of directly ahead of me on another adjacent range. And then there was a third location, and this was through the course of like maybe the first hour as it was dusk. But there was 3 different locations where I was hearing knocks, and they were all kind of distant. And I remember just kind of taking that in, like, whoa, what's going on here? And yeah, I mean, I don't like to talk too much about knocks, because that's to a certain degree, that's one of the few things that I've experienced in terms of alleged Bigfoot activity. And I've also been confused a lot of times and then realized I was hearing gunshots or construction or something like that. The more I listen. So I don't want to like put too much stock in that.
It's interesting. One of the things we talk about here on the show is the Occam's razor, about how the most obvious explanation is usually the explanation, but that doesn't say that's always the answer. So that's part of the mystery, right? So obviously, if you're hearing something, a wood knock, we know that for something to generate a wood knock, if it is indeed a wood knock, that something's doing it that probably has a thumb and is grasping something like a tool. So yeah, so that I'm sure you were thinking, well, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. I'm at this trailhead. I don't know, maybe somebody's shooting, maybe not, maybe, but yeah. So I'm sure you're probably checking down the list as you're sitting there in the dark.
No, but what you're saying is, I think the thing that kind of ruled out guns for me was it was coming from 3 distinctly different locations, not general locations that could have been the same individual, but it was 3 distinctly different. I was sitting on top of a knoll, and I was hearing stuff going on in the right, in the front, and then to the left. And the other thing about that was it was silent when I got there, and it wasn't until I started to initiate my own knocks that I started to hear what seemed like responses, because those sounds weren't present prior to me doing my own knocks. So I don't know. It could be a variety of different things, and looking back on it, it's been 10 years, so my memory isn't as good as it used to be. But
yeah, were you by the Klamath?
oh, I was at a trailhead on the north. I think it was the north end of Hoopa.
Okay.
So there was some logging roads that go up.
Yeah.
From Hoopa, and there's a certain camp there that one of the natives told me they had a history of encounters there. And then I was further up from there, a couple clicks north of the area where they had sightings. So my whole idea is maybe these things are coming down from the mountains, but knowing what I know now is more likely something was probably following the water that was in the area.
Yeah.
And not just going up from the mountaintops. But I mean, that was my thing is one thing that we'll learn in the course of this discussion is I've learned a lot more about animal behavior and kind of what to expect and how to premeditate where things are based off of where those encounters occur.
Yeah.
But yeah, I heard those knocks, and I remember the one to my left sounded like it could be at the base of like this knoll where I was at. So I remember trying to go down the mountain to see what it was. But I would get to the base of this collapsed tree, and then every time I would walk back, and then I would find myself sitting on the stump and then saying, no, I was going to go investigate that thing. And so I'd get up and walk, and then like subconsciously just make another turn and come and sit back down on the stump. And this is where people might explain it through some woo or something, like, oh, something was using mind control or something. But I don't feel like it was that. I feel like I was just having a really strong instinctual response to saying, you're in unfamiliar territory and you're walking into what could be a really dangerous situation. So go back. That was my subconscious, my instincts telling me, like, don't investigate any further.
Well, one of the things that we talk about and I mentioned to my firefighters in my job is that oftentimes I tell them, listen to the hair on the back of your neck. In other words, if something doesn't feel right, probably there's a reason. And, there's intuition. There's a lot of different things going on when you got that weird feeling like, something's telling you maybe I shouldn't be doing this. So certainly, I mean, I think that's probably a pretty good example of it. You're out there by yourself, you're in the middle of nowhere, and something's saying, maybe you should go sit back down.
I could have used that kind of good decision-making, kind of instinctual response when I put 90 pounds worth of gear in my back. To begin with, I should have been like, this might not be good for my personal health if I do this. Because at that point, I would have weighed less than what I weigh now. I think I was 165, and I was carrying over half of my body weight. And I was conditioning myself to do it every day. I'd walk 1.5 miles in this close by subdivision where I live. But still, like, your body doesn't really get used to that. It can in short spurts, but
yeah, that's a tough one. Certainly I did my little, obviously not anything like what you've been doing, but I did my short stint on the PCT, about a 4-day, quick hike. And a thing I walked away from was the idea that, I could actually see being able to, you get kind of trail hardened pretty quickly, after a few days, and I could see like, I could probably keep doing this, but But of course, I didn't have that kind of amount of gear either. I was a lot different prepared, but certainly, not quite to that extent, but easy for me to say, right?
Yeah. Well, I gotta say I've come a long way from that, and in addition to me packing smarter, it's also been good to have so many new technologies, lighter weight technologies develop. Because at that time there weren't the cameras that were powered by USB cables. You didn't have the portable power packs that could hold like a week's worth of charge for your phone, and only weigh a pound, maybe 2 pounds. That 20-pound generator seemed like the lightest weight alternative I could find 10 years ago. So,
and here we are. Fast forward to when we ran into you, and it's like I'm thinking, from talking to you, I'm thinking this guy's a pro. He's out here by himself. He's got Bandit with him. He's lightweight, and he's tracking on a trail that a lot of people don't even know exists and are having a hard time figuring out all the, because it's not. I think that maybe letting the listeners know too that this isn't just this trail that you hop on, that it's like at a nature center where all of a sudden you come to a place and there's arrows that says, turn, go right, and it's 3 miles to this point, or take a left and it's half a mile to the falls. I mean, you're a trail where you're basically, for all intents and purposes, breaking and maybe a new trail. So if we could just fast forward, there you are in Tennessee, you're going, hey,
right.
I'm going to go do this Bigfoot trail. I'm going to take Bandit and we're going to go do this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've got to mention, like, I didn't complete the trail. I did a big chunk of it.
Just say you completed it, and then we'll edit to where you sound like you did.
We'll edit the part
you did probably
the
at
whole
least
trail.
100% more trail than I did.
I did about 100 miles out of a 360-mile trail. And it was funny. It's funny that you said that you said the word pro, because that's what I thought I was after I did the Appalachian Trail back east here. And I mean, that's not a children's trail, like, even though children hike it every year. But that's a 6-month hike from Georgia to Maine, 2,189.2 when I hiked it. I think they've extended it through switchbacks to make it closer to 2,200 now.
Wow. It's definitely not for the faint of heart.
But it's a big trail, and the elevation gain and loss is like climbing up and down from Mount Everest 14 times.
Oh my!
If you do the entirety of it. And I forget how many states it is, but yeah, I did that back in 2015. And at that point I had to learn lightweight gear. I'd gone from a 15-pound tent to like a 3.5-pound tent, and had made a lot of changes. I didn't carry in my water. Now I had a lightweight water filter, and now I was hiking in lighter foods, MREs. Like, the thing about MREs is you eat those and you still got 3/4 of the weight in packaging, or at least half of the weight. But yeah, so I mean, I had made a lot of progress through that experience, and I was ready to take on the next long distance trail. And instead of going on to the Pacific Crest Trail or the Continental Divide Trail and trying to become a Triple Crowner, I had a lot to take into consideration because Bandit was getting older, and I didn't want to have to put him through another 2,000 miler.
Yeah.
And I still wanted to hike some stuff with him, and the Bigfoot Trail had been on my radar for a long time because Bigfoot. So I reached out to the guy who kind of designed the route and was trying to get it national recreation trail status. And we had some conversations about it. I got a map set PDF, and I was ready. I was like, 360, that's nothing compared to the 2000. Even if these mountains are more rugged, I can tough it out, right?
Yeah.
But the thing that made the Bigfoot Trail difficult was the navigation on it. And yeah, very similar to that first experience I had in 2010. In 2018, when I was out there in the Klamath Mountains, I was experiencing all over again what it's like to get lost. Because there, like Kip says, there's no signs, there's no like well paved trail for you to just stroll along. And I think that was probably what changed the attitude of a through hike. There were a couple of things that were working there against me, and one of them was the navigation, the difficulty, and not having the 20 or so maps I think you need to kind of navigate it, because it goes in and out of so many different national forests, and I think it goes into a national park. It goes into redwoods at one point. But yeah, so I didn't have all of the map sets, and I still had a few of them, but I didn't have all of them. And then the other thing that made it difficult was Bandit was, for the first time within just a month or so within us taking our trip, he started to just show some early arthritis, and I hadn't had an effective like treatment for him, so it was killing me, and I had to make a decision not to do the whole thing because he was starting to limp. But the good thing about Bandit is we've been exercising a lot more at home, and that was the problem. Was I prepared a lot for this trip with gear and planning out the road trip before it and getting there, but I wasn't really exercising like I had with the Appalachian Trail, like I did when I was hiking out there in the Trinity Alps in 2010. So we were kind of out of shape, and Bandit wasn't fit enough, I think, to kind of walk off. He was
well, it reminds me of that one night in Laos when you were kind of wanting to interview people, and I said, yeah, that sounds great. And I said, why don't you guys come over into because I had my shift pod there. Of course, when I'm camping, I like to camp kind of luxuriously. And so you and Bandit came over, and I turned on all my lights in my shift pod and struck up my heater in there, and I had my carpet down. And I'll never forget, you and I were talking, and Bandit laid there on the carpet and just stretched out and just like he was in some sort of heaven. And it was just hilarious. And when we were done talking, we're going to go back to the campfire. And Bandit's like, no, you can just leave me here. I'm good. So.
There was a lot about that trip that I kind of experienced with Bandit, and when it came to him and his limp, he had good days, he had bad days. A lot of it there was a lot of temperature fluctuation and stuff, and that kind of I'm glad that I took that trip and that we kind of had a little difficulty, because now we go out and we walk every day. And I've been giving him joint supplements regularly, and he doesn't really exhibit any stiffness or rigidness in his walk now. He's always up and ready, energized, ready to go. So I think I needed to take that trip and experience that, my dog is aging just like everyone else. And and I've got to start taking care of him because I know that he still wants to go and do things with me. And so it's just going to require a little bit more. And so now he's always up for something, but yeah, I'm at that point where, do I have to start hiking alone again? Because there's a lot of trails out there to hike, but he actually did better. We did half of the Lone Star Trail in Texas last year, and I was the one limping because I had a high ankle sprain, and he was turning around looking at me like, "Come on, man! Like, what's your deal?" But going back to that 2018 trip where we met, you guys might recall I had an interview with someone on the Hoopa Valley Reservation. He was his name's Ken Norton, and he's the director of the tribal EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency there. And we talked about a lot of different things, but I remember this moment in my journey where I think both of us still had the will to continue and experience more. But I remember like having those difficulties of what do I do now? Do I still want to have Bandit hike with me, or do we throw the towel in? Do we want to experience another 50 miles of it, or are we finished? And I remember having this interview with Ken, and he told me, if you're out there and you're trying to experience some mystery in nature, you have to be attuned with nature. So you have to be alert and aware of the things around you, but then you also have to respect it and do your best to honor nature. And I thought about that, and I was like, well, my dog's an animal. My dog's a part of nature, and I've got to have this respect and thoughtfulness, or things aren't going to happen our way. And so that's when I started carrying his pack and doing a lot more for him, and just letting him take his time and take it in casual strides that go at his own pace. And we still got to see the redwoods and all this conifer diversity, which the Bigfoot Trail is known for. 32 different species of conifer trees within 360 miles. So that's like that kind of tree diversity is like what you'd expect to see in like the rainforest or the southeast, like the Smoky Mountain Range, which is, by the way, temperate rainforest. So yeah, I kind of went out there as an environmental stewardship project that I started on my own, and wanted to interview people, and it really turned more towards Bigfoot stuff again, because I just got to meet you guys and even Bobo and Steven, and I think that in a lot of ways that saved the trip and really enriched the experience for me and Bandit was kind of rolling up. And you didn't mention that we rolled up in camp.
You did. That's
after
right.
dark.
And when anytime somebody comes into camp unexpected after dark, everybody's hackles are up and wondering, okay, who is this?
I think everybody had the guns on the car too. We were
not
aiming at you.
And you know what? And I told myself, I was like, I knew that was kind of the scenario. I was like, I'm showing up at a camp at dark, and I mean, the guy from the bookstore told me it'd be okay, but deep down inside, I was wondering what kind of welcome I would get.
And then you get us.
And it was a warm one, actually. I recall thinking it was just a very chance encounter to meet you. And at the same time, we were all up there, trying to do some interesting things down at the film site. But here's this young man from Tennessee and his dog that are actually hiking the Bigfoot Trail and trying to learn things. And so, yeah, it was a perfect match. It was a great situation that just seemed to. And if you fall back to some of that talk that you had with Ken Norton about how you experience things and you just kind of let things happen, and here's a great example, right?
Well, I was torn between, well, do I go out, introduce myself, or do I just lay down in the back, lock the doors, and wait till morning? um, but yeah, I mean, and I've found myself in similar situations back here. You know, I do a lot in the Midwest too. I'm not always out in California and whatnot, but yeah, I don't know. It's funny. It has a funny way of happening like that
It really
sometimes.
does. So, Ron, we got to ask you. This is the Bluff Creek Project podcast. So, in 1967, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin filmed a Bigfoot. What do you think? Do you think it could be real? Do you think it could be a guy in a costume? What's your opinion on that?
You know, I was always on the fence about it. When I first got into it as a kid, I was like, "Oh, that's such a real Bigfoot." And then I got a little older, and I was sitting there thinking, like, I don't know. I mean, it could be a compelling case, you know, that it could have been, you know, some type of elaborate fabrication. And I used to listen to a show about Bigfoot, another podcast back in the day everybody took a different stance on it. And nothing really changed for a long time. I was kind of on the fence because the show would constantly debate it. I was on the fence up until the point where maybe, how long ago was it? It was last year. It was spring of last year. I met Bob Gimlin at a Bigfoot conference in Texas. And I sat down and, like an idiot, I talked to him about horses and things that weren't Bigfoot. But no, in all seriousness, I knew that everybody talks to him about Bigfoot. So I just wanted to have a conversation with him. And he's a really phenomenal guy. And he's so interesting. And I think what did it for me was later when he actually gave his presentation and he talked about his experience. The sincerity, the genuine truth that you could tell was there. His encounter, his experience, the major details of the encounter itself, and then the minor details that flowed seamlessly together about how they were trying to get back to the tracks like the following day. And I don't know, like, it's just, that was what made it for me. And I'm pretty convinced that he saw Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you that I have that much stock in any other eyewitness report.
Yeah.
He knows what he experienced, and he's had plenty of years to tell people.
And we've all met Bob Gimlin, and he's such a humble guy. I don't ever see him being a liar like that, or even carrying on a lie for that long would be so stressful.
Right. Well, that was the thing too. It was that, going back to that conversation about horses and trails and dogs, like that really shed a lot of light on his character for me. And so I think I learned more from that, because everyone's going to ask him the same questions about how tall was Patty, you know, did you smell anything? Did you hear anything? There's not a single question pertaining to Bigfoot that he hasn't been asked at least once. And for me, I was like, well, what can I learn about the guy who says he saw Bigfoot? And the character that I encountered, the individual that he revealed himself to be in a casual conversation about nothing, it gave me the confidence in believing that story that he told us about something, you know, that account that he revealed. So in a way, I wanted to get off topic, to kind of analyze him a little bit. And I feel like he stands up, you know.
Yeah.
He's definitely one of those,
he checks
those
out
people
for
that,
me.
And, you know, I like to think that I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I'm a good judge of people. But the fact is that Bob Gimlin, he doesn't care who you are. He doesn't care what your title is. He doesn't care how big you are in the Bigfoot world. He doesn't care. He is a genuine person, and he will give you the time. He likes to talk to people. He's a kind-hearted person, and if that tells you something about the kind of character the man has, I think that just kind of what you're mentioning about how talking about riding trail and horses and dogs, he's obviously he's a real person, and he's a kind-hearted gentleman. So,
not to mention that. Well, sorry, not to mention that, but the film's going to be what, like 53 years old in this October. That guy has been talking to people about the film for 52 years.
I'd say there was probably a long pause in the middle there, where he had to go out and earn a living, and it obviously in the last, let's say, 15 years, the Bigfooting phenomena had really, with the internet and with all these other things, it's kind of come to light. So I'm sure there was a pause there where he probably at some point didn't want to even talk about it. He was out training horses and doing things, but
well, even 15 years is a long time.
Well, it is.
Be willing to talk to people about it and still.
When you're 27 years old, 15 years is a long time. But when you're 52 years old like me, that's that twinkle in an eye. But Ron, I think I remember when we met you and talking about some of your, the adventure that you were on, and I'll just say it. I'm 52 years old, and I would be scared to death to be hiking out there by myself, dog, no dog. But I found it extremely compelling sitting there and talking to you around the campfire about being out there by yourself. And of course, what everybody would probably want to know, and I certainly wanted to know, was, did you experience anything out there that you couldn't explain? And you're out there on the Bigfoot trail by yourself with Bandit, and obviously, you're out there hiking and you're taking in the experience, but for all intents and purposes, you're a Bigfooter. So you're out there. So what was it like? Is there anything that you kind of made you scratch your head a little bit and maybe made you feel a little frightened and a little scared?
Yeah, on the Bigfoot trail itself, I had one day, first day actually, I came in kind of in a middle section because where it starts is really remote, and where we got on, it was a better quality trail. So the guy who gave me a ride and who's part of the trail committee was kind of suggesting, well, hey, you can start here, and if you're ready for more trail after, you can backtrack and do this other section. But yeah, so I started on this trail, and it was raining. It had rained most of the day, and I got out later in the evening, maybe 3 or 4 p.m. is when I actually got on the trail. And I was moving real slow too, not because my pack weighed heavy anymore, but because I was trying to identify these different types of conifers that are along the trail. But I went around a couple of ridge lines and stuff and put a few miles in before dusk. And I just remember going around this bend, and there were a lot of trees kind of growing just a couple of feet below the slope where the trail is. And then there's kind of like this little flat area before it dives back down and goes down to the river. And I remember seeing what I thought was a dark stump. And as I was walking, those trees that were on the slope were kind of obscuring my view of that flat area and where that stump was. And as I passed by a couple of those trees, like I looked, and it seemed like the stump was now like taller. And so I was telling myself, well, what was that? And then when I tried to look back, on the other side of the tree, because before my mind could even process, like I was looking at something that might be in the moving, I had kind of walked in front of another tree and couldn't see it. So I tried to do a double take, and then I couldn't see that stump, and I couldn't make visual contact. And so I walked around, and I backtracked several feet back, several yards back, and walked the whole track again. like trying to find this stump that I was looking at. And there were other stumps in the area, but I don't know if I was disoriented in the low light or what, but it seemed like the thing that I was looking at initially was closer to the ground, and it got taller within a couple of seconds of me like breaking visual contact through those trees. And then it was not there. So I don't know. I'm not familiar with that area. I don't hike it every day. So maybe there was just a visual kind of perception error or something like that. But I just kind of sat there and was really quiet. And I thought I heard some movement, some large movement, just down that little flat area. Because I don't know if I'm describing the area well enough, but the trail's up on high on a ridge, and then there's like a little drop off down the ridge, and then there's an area that flattens out, and there was a bunch of shrubs and stumps and trees and stuff growing, and then it drops down again down to the bottom of the valley where the river is. Huh. And so I was hearing something move, and I just hearing like a thud, like not what you would expect to hear with like a deer or something, but it was just a dark shape, and it kind of appeared that this dark shape changed shape, and then I heard movement in the area. But that honestly, it could have just been an unrelated movement, unrelated sounds, and maybe I just imagined some movement there. I mean, it was pretty dark. I'm not gonna lie about that. It wasn't broad daylight, but it was low lighting. And then all of that next day, my dog was kind of growling and looking back on the trail, and I'd turn around and would see nothing, would hear no one. And we were totally alone on the trail the whole day. But he would do that. He would look back, and his ears would focus in on something way back on the trail, and he would kind of like growl real low. And then we would go, and it was an eerie feeling. Like you said, like I had more of an eerie feeling about it than anything. And the events of the prior night didn't really,
like,
it didn't really
change
that.
That's interesting, because I'm picturing that. Yeah, you've moved on. At some point, you're gonna, break, start your camp and eat something, and and I'm sure that's running through your mind as you're putting your tent up and trying to get a warm, dry spot for you and Bandit, and eating your dinner and sitting there probably thinking, was that my mind playing tricks on me? I am on the Bigfoot trail after all. So who knows, right?
It's named that for a reason.
Well, yeah, and that was the thing that I had to face. Like when I was on the Appalachian Trail, I didn't really there's a lot of activity. Your mind's constantly weighing through, when are you going to resupply? What's going on? There's been a bear sighting. I'm reading this journal to figure out what's going on with my buddy that I haven't seen in 4 weeks, because he was here in the shelter 2 weeks ago. Or you find out, you're preoccupied with a lot when you're hiking a trail like that, and there's a lot of humans there that you're interacting with. But something about like hiking these trails out in Northern California, it's different because your mind focuses in on things, and it's sometimes it's like it's magnified like by 1,000. So whatever fears you have, like they're a lot more powerful out there. Any insecurities or anything, or wild ideas of creature encounters. So that was the thing I had to realize pretty early on. And going back to the Appalachian Trail, is the longer I was hiking it, the weirder, more surreal it would get. So I'm one of those people, like I have to constantly reevaluate my judgment, because I've had a lot of weird things happen out there. But were there truly weird things going on, or was my mind reacting in a weird way? Which you don't have to be crazy to see something that isn't there. You just have to be in enough of a unfamiliar circumstances to where things you're not accustomed to start happening and your brain goes off the deep end.
I think when people say
So,
things like your mind playing tricks on you, it's true. I've been there. I'm sure everybody has. But, you know, again, I'm thinking about you by yourself with Bandit out there by yourself. I'm sure there were times when you were perfectly fine and everything was great. And I'm sure there's got to be times when you were completely scared to death, asking yourself, why am I out here by myself? How do you cope with those types of situations when you're scared to death? How do you get past that?
I'm trying to think of some of the most dangerous situations. I feel like with Bigfoot stuff, I've always been relatively calm. And I'll get to a story because I've done a lot in the Boggy Creek area in Fouke, Arkansas. And that area continues to test my patience and you know, mental togetherness, which is why I keep going back every year. But I guess like there's a lot of most of the situations where I'm like, could I die? You know, and I'm scared for my life. It's things that we know exist. You know, thunderstorms. I'm on top of a hill and a thunderstorm comes in with 50-mile-per-hour winds, and all of a sudden I'm stuck on a mountain and lightning's flashing all around me. And to those types of situations, or to a bear or to a rattlesnake, it's a fight or flight kind of what do you do? Like instinctual response is I'm gonna stand my ground and look intimidating and not run from a predator. Or if I'm in a lightning storm, I'm gonna get in the fetal position and wait for it to pass over. But for those strange circumstances, getting into more of the Bigfoot stuff, I don't know. I lose it a lot of times. I wish I could tell you I'm like super cool and suave. You know, I just kind of hang out and do whatever. But I have had times where I've had to stoke the flames and make an impromptu torch and look off into the woods and appear threatening. You know, or I'll sit down and I had a dream one time about something approaching me in the woods, and I've kind of taken that same action that I took in this dream, and if things start moving around you, like what's the closest thing that I can modify into a weapon? Do I pick up a log? Do I grab a big rock and just hide it behind my back until something comes barging out? A lot of the times I have a knife on me, but I don't carry a firearm, and so what can I do? Best case scenario is if I have a knife and a stick, I can make a spear, and it's not as effective as a bullet, but I can throw it. So I've sharpened sticks before in situations that look like, but most of the time I just leave. The dog is an early alarm thing. So if he starts freaking out and he's hysterical, that's an early indicator for me to leave.
That's a good alarm right there.
Before I get hysterical. Well, yeah, because he knows about stuff that could be another 500 feet outside of camp, farther than what I am aware of. So that means I got 500 feet of space and time for something to close in for me to make the decision. Okay, do we need to leave? If he does a low growl or a bark, that's my kind of okay. There could be something out there, but it could be anything. But if he goes right into a mad, frothing at the mouth, like something's gonna come after us and it's a fight to the death type, bark, then that's like that's when I need to leave. So a lot of times, my dog's judgment is usually the indicator to start making a decision, start thinking about the risk. And yeah, in those types of situations, which have happened, and actually I had, after a couple weeks after I was with you guys, I was in Washington and we had a moment like that in Fouke Meadow.
Ooh, squashy place.
That was my first time I'd ever been there. It was gated off because it was off season, and they gated it, I guess, to I'm not sure exactly why they gated it now that I think back. But I think it might have just been a seasonal thing. And I walked in about a mile on the road that continued. And so I was about a mile away from my car, and I kind of scoped it out during the day. And then I said, I'm coming back at dusk. So I went back and had lunch, and we walked out there, and I just stood in like this natural blind. I set up a chair, had a sleeping bag. I got comfortable. I was reading a book about Bigfoot in Canada because I was going to Canada next. And we were in this blind overlooking the meadow. And I was like, something's going to walk out here. And whether it's an elk or a bear or maybe Bigfoot, I'm just going to sit here. I'm not going to make my presence known. I'm not going to do any knocks, any calls, anything. I'm just going to sit here. And it was quiet for a while. And across the opposite end, and I wish I could describe more of this blind, because it's three big like evergreen trees. And they were all real close together. And there was just a little peek hole for me to look out of, but I could see the entire field. I went in there, and I that's when I knew where I was going to go back after I hiked back to my car. I had the location all picked out. But I was sitting there, and I started to hear barred owls, which, barred owls are common. They're all over the place. And I don't remember if I mimicked a barred owl call or what, but somewhere in there I heard a knock. And that's kind of when I stood upright, because I wasn't. Oh, I remember now. Okay, so it was quiet. I heard owls, and then I heard a knock, and I didn't respond to the knock. I responded by doing an owl call. And when I did the owl call, it got quiet after that. I didn't hear the bar, or I did hear more owls, but I didn't hear any more knocking. It was just one single knock. And then from behind me, all of a sudden, after about 15 minutes of silence, I heard something big approaching us from behind. And that's when Bandit stood up, and he did like that very aggressive bark. Something caught him off guard, and he wasn't happy about it. But I could hear something big moving. We both heard it at the same time, which is hardly ever the case. Bandit keeps this radar around him that goes much wider than anything. So he barks once or twice, and then whatever he heard, I never get to hear it. But we both heard that thing at the same time, whatever was out there. It could have been an elk, because there's a lot of elk sign out there, a lot of tracks and stuff. But it moved up. It went back up the ridge, and that's when I was like, well, we need to get out. So I packed up my stuff, and I could hear it moving. And then at the same time, it started raining, and it started coming down pretty hard. And this was in October. So it was pretty cold. But otherwise, like, my whole plan was we were going to sit there in that blind until something flushed us out. And then we were just going to pace back and forth along this road that led back to our car. And so it would just be a dash back to the car along a gravel road, and we'd be back, and we'd be safe, and we'd leave if we had to. But it never got that far, because when we got flushed out by something, whatever it was, that's when it started raining, so we had to leave. But that was one of those things that was just kind of super creepy, because there was enough of something going on that suggested a Bigfoot, and then also like some big movement around us. So I don't know. At the end of the day, I still tell myself, well, more than likely it was an elk. But there's a lot of experiences that I've had like that have me guessing. Boggy Creek's one of the worst, I think.
I
What do you guys want to hear about
I would
Boggy
love
Creek?
to hear about it.
Or what? All right. So I've been going back out there, I would say since 2016. So that's 1, 2, 3. I've done 3 or 4 years I've gone out there. I didn't go out that year, 2018, when I came out to see you guys. But I've been going out there and checking out some certain spots around Mercer Bayou. And Boggy Creek itself goes right through the town of Fouke. And I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, like 1972, there was a movie that came out called The Legend of Boggy Creek by a director named Charles Pierce. It was his first film, but it did really well, and it's a cult classic, and a lot of people swear by it being the best Bigfoot movie ever made. But yeah, I wanted to go check it out. A lot of those sightings that the movie's based off of took place in the late 50s.
Oh yeah.
Have you guys
I think
seen
everybody, well, anybody that's into Bigfooting has seen that movie.
Yeah, so that was a spot that I had really wanted to explore, and it was kind of on the way to my first Texas Bigfoot conference. So I stopped by and I did a little bit of camping out there, and I went and checked out the Monster Mart, which is a really cool, unique destination. It's kind of like a get your Bigfoot souvenirs and get gas and snacks before you go out there. And the owner, his name's Denny. He's a really cool guy. But I got familiar with that area. I actually had a tour. We actually, from the conference down in Jefferson, Texas, which is about an hour south, we all drove up, and Lyle Blackburn, the guy who wrote The Beast of Boggy Creek, actually gave us like a tour of where all the old sightings took place there in town. So Lyle's a cool guy. I sat down with him the night before, and we talked about accessing Mercer Bayou and how to get back there and how many alligators I gotta look out for and stuff like that. So we had a good conversation at this little restaurant, and I went out there and I did a few things. First, like I checked out Boggy Creek in itself in town, and then I ventured out and found like an area to camp. It's a free area to camp, kind of like Louse Camp. If you can drive there, you can camp there. And then I found some of the access points to the Sulphur River and Mercer Bayou and some of those areas surrounding the town of Fouke where sightings persist. And that was where I wanted to go, because I didn't want to go Bigfooting into someone's backyard. I wanted to get off the beaten path, because these sightings to me are something where the creature is kind of oozing out or leaking out of its normal territory and having encounters with people on the fringe of its territory, of their territory. So that's kind of, you can see how my thought process on Bigfoot and encounters and real life behaviors kind of changed over the years. And so I was telling myself, well, everyone says Boggy Creek and everyone says Sulphur River, but when I come out here and I do a little reconnaissance of the area, there's a lot of exposed areas out here. There's a lot of people out on the river, and there's a lot of people over here from different times. There's a bridge, a highway that goes over it. So I said, well, I want to check out Mercer Bayou. And I went out there in a little kayak that I brought. And it was getting later in the evening, so I just kind of cracked the windows and let Bandit snooze, because he'd been out hiking all that day before. So I was getting into Mercer Bayou, and it was weird, because it was just like the opening scene of the movie. Where like there's like all these like reptiles and amphibians hopping and crawling around, and so I'm looking at like lily pads and cattails, and there's like tree frogs jumping from like leaf to leaf, and then some bug like running across the surface of the water or something. And what got me was that sound where they show the beaver. I always thought it was the beaver. It's not. It's some type of waterfowl. But that sound that goes, ah, ah,
yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. So when I started hearing that, I'm like, that was kind of spooky. I was like, I'm in the opening sequence. I'm just waiting for the scream. But yeah, so I was out there, and then something big would move under the water. But then I got further into the bayou, and I could see the bald cypress trees and like a lot of like the flowering like lilies and everything. It was beautiful. But then I told myself, I was like, I'm coming back here after dark. And so I paddled out, and it actually got dark on me like as I was paddling back, and I was getting more and more scared, paddling faster and faster, trying to get back to the boat ramp. And I just remember like skidding in, and like that moment where I skid in, I looked around and I was like, it's officially too dark for me to be out on the water. I just remember like this photo finish, like racing the last light of day, like
That's amazing.
back to my car. But yeah, so there I was back there, and me and Bandit went back. I actually met some guys the night before. It was like a large group of them. It was like 7 of them. And they had come down there to do a little fishing, but also try their luck Bigfooting. And just by conversation, we realized we were both out there to do the same thing. Well, that day I was exploring the river and Mercer Bayou and going to where these sightings took place. And those guys went to some lady's house who said that she sees Bigfoot in her backyard all the time. And then if they look over there where those little holes in the ground are, that's where the fairies live. And so they got to hear some colorful stories that day of like fairies and little people and like and Bigfoot babies eating blueberry bagels. So it was one of those situations where they were kind of discouraged because they're like, yeah, I think she was just a little lonely,
or not.
And I don't know where they met her. I don't know where you find individuals like that. I guess anywhere, but yeah, they were kind of discouraged, and I was like, well, guys, let's go out here. I don't know this place much better than you do, but I was just at a really cool spot. Let's go check it out. Now, up to this point, I had been pretty religious about getting my field recorder and everything. But when we pulled up, I was like, I don't need it. You know, my idea was we were going to come back. Like, we were just going to do some knocks and stuff around where the cars were parked. But we actually hiked in a little bit. And I didn't think. I was like, well, I'll go back to my car in a minute here to get the recorder out. But then before I knew it, we were like on the trail going deeper towards the edge of the bayou. And then we started doing knocks in the woods. And I kind of sat down. I was just kind of chill. They had a baseball bat, a Louisville Slugger, and I was like, I'm going to let you do whatever you're going to do. I'm just going to sit here and chill. And they started knocking, and then they were telling me, well, I hear something. And I'm like, I don't hear anything. And it took maybe a couple more minutes, but because they were further up from me in different spots. But then I started to hear these knocks too coming out of the bayou. And then the more we would listen, you know, because you have to imagine there's a few people there all in one location. So there's 7 people constantly whispering, and you're trying to hear what's going on. But sure enough, we were hearing knocks. And then when everybody would kind of hush up a little bit, we'd realize that the knocks were coming closer. Now there was one car. These guys had gone out for like an evening of fishing, and they had gotten there when I was just before I was leaving. But there was a boat that went out there, a bass boat, and then they were the only people out there in that section of bayou. And we were hearing these knocks come out of the swamp. And we were thinking, well, maybe it's them. And that's when they came in with their boat, and they docked to our left, but we still heard the knocks in front of us. And so those people were over there loading up their boat, and then we heard these knocks kind of trail off like into a different end of the bayou. Yeah, so whatever was coming towards us when that boat came through, it stopped where it was and then changed its direction. So that was one thing that happened there. But then that whole area in Fouke, like I've also found like a lot of like just off into the woods a little bit, I found a lot of skeletons of different animals. And it's one of those things like, okay, I get it if somebody's hunting out here. They might shoot a hog, or maybe they're fishing and they got a fish skeleton. But there was like a turtle skeleton, a fish, part of a fish skeleton, some type of canid, and then there was like a deer jaw. There was like, it was a bunch of just dead things off of the place. And I came back a third time after that. And just going back to the time we heard the knocks, that was the only time I'd really seen the bayou like where the water was way up, because the following summer they drained it because they had a lot of invasive plants and a couple of non-wanted fish. They wanted more sports fish in there. I don't know if they had some type of invasive fish species or whatever, but they're trying to like restore that area, but the water level's been way down. So I haven't been able to get out there on a kayak since the first time, but I'll still go out there and continue to hear things. Now, you guys were talking about earlier about how I cope with like a stressful situation pertaining to a Bigfoot. I went out there and almost lost my mind one time. This was the following year. This is the first year since the bayou had been drained. And I went out there and did knocks just like last time, see if I could get any results. And what I was hearing was animal sounds. And it started with barred owl, which I expect barred owl to be everywhere, and they're very vocal at night. So I don't ever really think Bigfoot when I hear barred owl. And then I heard great horned owl. And so I was just like, I remember thinking when I got there, I was like, there's a lot of owls out tonight, because you barred owl, which sounds like who cooks for you, you know.
Yeah.
And then I'd hear the very low great horned owl, which is a and so I'd hear that, and then I'd hear the barred owl, and they were going back and forth. I'm like, they're talking to each other. You must know they're related. And but then I'd hear a third one over here. And then what would throw me off is like this thing that I thought was a barred owl now sounds like a horned owl. And then this one over here now sounds like a barred owl when it was a horned owl earlier. And so then I had like this trifecta of 3 different locations around me where there was at least 2 different types of owls theoretically in the same tree together or within 20 feet of each other. And this and I was trying to do knocks. I wouldn't get any knocks. And I was getting frustrated. I was like, well, there's lots of owls, but where are the knocks? That's when a pack of coyotes ran through behind us, or behind me, and me and Bandit, and they were yipping and howling and stuff. Because this was another time where it was just me and the dog. Because I team up from time to time, but I wasn't with anybody else that night. But yeah, so you had all these coyotes run through real quick, just on the hunt or whatever. But they moved on pretty quick, and then I started hearing like coyote howls from the same 3 locations where I was hearing these owls. And the thing that was driving me crazy was I was like, how could this be? You know, where there weren't coyotes previously, where there wasn't like a certain type of owl. Like I've never been in the forest where there's literally like 50 animals hanging out together, like in one small location. And that's when I started to get nervous. And I got back closer to my car at that point, and I had the microphone out, but I don't know what happened to those files. But I can't say I really got anything yielding. But at that point I was like, okay, something weird's going on. And I'm either just going to sit here and be confused for a couple of hours and then give up and go home and just have to accept that these were all animals, or I'm going to buckle down and see if I can crack what's going on now. And so I was like, well, how do I deviate from the norm? Because the knocks aren't getting me a reaction. I'm just hearing a bunch of animal sounds, and I cannot expose them to be imitations. They sound exactly like what a coyote or a horned owl or a barred owl sounds like. And trust me, I've played the vocalizations. I've deep dived animal sounds since those rough and tumble years where I didn't really know what was around me. And what I started doing was I started doing different sounds of domestic animals to kind of counter wild animal sounds. So I was like, well, this is weird and I have no explanation for it. So let me meow like a cat. Let me moo like a cow. Let me bark like a dog. And when I did that, like probably within 5 to 10 minutes of me, ow, moo. At this point, I feel completely mental. I have very low self-esteem. I was like, this is what Bigfoot's gotten you to, making animal sounds in the woods. But then I heard a knock. And that was the only knock
weird.
I heard that night. And things just got really like claustrophobic for me because I had been hearing animal sounds all around me, and it seemed like they were pretty close. And I was just looking all around, and there was something way in the distance. And it could have been a barking dog, it could have been a coyote or something, but there was a vocalization that I heard way in the distance where I heard the single knock. And that's the thing. I'm so frustrated with auditory type stuff because you most of the time you hear something out of what I would call the corner of your ear, so far away, and you're unsure, like, what was that? I was distracted. I was messing around with a recorder or a camera, and I was making a lot of clattering sound, and then I heard what could have been what I've been listening for. But it's never been like 100% confidence. Oh yeah, I've heard this Bigfoot, But yeah, that was some weird stuff. And I remember I was frustrated because I felt like something was toying with me. And so what did I do? I got in my car, and as I left at 5 miles an hour, I blared to the maximum volume of my SUV with its Sony sound system, the Sierra sounds, the angry call. So basically, I got so frustrated, I cussed out Bigfoot in his own language as I was leaving, So that I just remember like that was probably the point where like I was just in meltdown. Like I was like, I cannot process what's going on around me, and I've had enough. So I'm going home. But anything that's out there, whether you're an owl or another owl or a coyote or something different, like I'm just letting you know I'm not happy.
That's hilarious.
Well, Ron, we're coming up. We've been talking for a while, and this is great stuff. I think I want to ask you one final question, and that would be for that 17-year-old that's out there that really wants to go out and explore, that 17-year-old you, what would be the biggest piece of advice you'd give that person to go out and do what you've done?
You know what really escalated things for me and helped me troubleshoot it? Because I was one of those guys that I started before a lot of this convenient technology was out here, and a lot has changed since in terms of social media since I've been doing this. So what I would suggest to somebody who's getting into this, who wants to go out there, be independent, learn how to look for Bigfoot as an individual or even with groups, is learn from a more direct source. Look on and see what you can find in your area or maybe outside your area if you can travel with a family vacation or something. In terms of like conferences, find the Bigfoot community in various places. If you're listening to a podcast, you're already off to a good start. But go out there and engage in some of these social media groups that are Bigfoot investigators and ask questions and be open. And in worst case scenario, somebody's rude and then you just stop following that page and there's a few more just like it. So use social media as a tool to learn from people who have already gotten their feet wet so that you don't get wet up to your neck. And just, I don't know, be curious and take it at a pace that you're comfortable with. If you're not comfortable rushing into it, then don't rush into it. If you're not comfortable rushing into it alone, then don't go alone. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of just did my own thing. So I don't want to tell people to do my thing. I just want to tell them to do their own thing as well, because none of us have found Bigfoot yet. So it's going to take an individual with his own creativity or her own creativity and originality to bring different results than what we already have.
It's funny because in firefighting, I always, we always talk about train like you fight like you train type of thing. But certainly one of the things that I always ask ourselves is, are we good or are we lucky? And oftentimes, my answer is usually, you know what? I'll take a little bit of both. I think that we can do our best to try and be prepared. Certainly, if that is a goal to go out and whether it's I want to prove a species because I want to be important, or I just want to know for myself because I saw something or I know somebody that saw something and I want to find out for myself. Prepare yourself. But certainly, I think it's going to be one of those situations where two cowboys are riding on a horse, riding up a creek, and all of a sudden have this opportunity that just happen to have a camera, those types of things. So, but yeah, you know what, Ron, I really hope that our paths cross again at some point. I'm going to be taking off in a new job here pretty soon, so I'll be up in Washington State, and but I'm hoping that we're going to be able to spend some more time around a campfire, and definitely hope that it's the dynamic duo of you and Bandit. I know he's getting long in the tooth, but good that you guys are out there exploring still. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your Sunday, and just really interesting stuff. Good stuff. I think it's probably, I'd reflect back and think this is probably one of our better opportunities, better interviews. So thank you for that.
I
And with
appreciate
that,
it.
Tate, you got anything else to add before we call it an evening?
Nope. Thank you so much, Ron. Other than thank you so much, Ron, for coming on. That's all I really have to add.
All right. Well, and with that, we are the Bluff Creek Project Podcast. And once again, thanks for listening.